Welcome everyone to the Lofi Poli Sci podcast. I'm your host Michael Pickering. That's right, Lo-Fi as in low fidelity, low quality, in your face, messy as can be global news show. It's Tuesday, Lo-Fi Nation, and you know what that means. It's time for Tuesday's Top 10 list. Every Tuesday, we look at global indicators and surveys to see what countries hold the top 10 rankings in particular categories. We'll cover things like GDP, oldest country, happiest countries, and more. And no worries, Lo-Fi listener. We'll cover what each category means before we jump into the list. Today's top 10 list, the most corrupt countries on the planet. This list accompanies last week's list on the least corrupt countries in the world. And how again do we know which countries are the most corrupt? Via the organization called Transparency International. And to bring back last week's quote of their mission statement for you, begin quote. Our mission is to stop corruption and promote transparency, accountability, and integrity at all levels across all sectors of society. Our vision is a world in which government, politics, business, civil society, and the daily lives of people are free of corruption. We are independent, non-governmental, not-for-profit, and work with like-minded partners across the world to end the injustice of corruption. End quote. Transparency International creates the Corruption Perception Index each year. It ranks countries by perceived levels of corruption because you cannot go into a country and just ask the people in the government, excuse me, are you corrupt? Yes or no? Thank you. No, it doesn't work like that. So what do? They use a combination of 13 surveys taken by experts and business executives from some of the most reputable institutions in the world. For a partial list, please see last week's episode. The ranking is based on a score of 0 to 100. 0 being completely corrupt, and 100 being completely free of corruption. But enough talk though, where's the list? Well, here we go. Coming in at, and all of the four following countries are tied for number 12. Libya, Guinea-Bissau, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Haiti, all with scores of 18 out of 100. Number 8, North Korea, with a score of 17 out of 100. The following three countries are all tied for number 7. Sudan, Afghanistan, Venezuela, with scores of 16 out of 100. Number 4, Yemen, with a 15 out of 100. Number 3, Syria, 13 out of 100. Number 2, South Sudan, 12 out of 100. And coming in at number 1, and perceived to be the most corrupt country on the planet, I'll give you a 5 count to guess. And a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it's Somalia, with a score of 9 out of 100 on the Corruption Perception Index. Now let's take a closer look at our list and see what implications can be drawn. Firstly, of our 12 countries, 6 are in Africa, 2 in the Middle East, 1 in Asia, 1 in the Caribbean, 1 in Central Asia, 1 in South America. In short, these countries are spread throughout the entire world, although half of the list does appear in Africa. However, Africa has more countries in it than the other above named regions, so I don't take that much from that. Secondly, Europe and North America are not represented in this list, a glaring observation that I would be open to further interpretations of, but we'll leave that to you to write in to tell me your thoughts. A third and perhaps the most important observation is that these are some of the poorest, most conflict-stricken, and countries with the lowest amount of foreign direct investment in the world. In short, these are all developing countries. And if you looked closer to see other development indicators for these countries, they are also very low. But don't take my word for it. Look it up yourself. Remember last week we talked about how low scores on the Corruption Perception Index have been cited as being correlated with countries that have low foreign direct investment, as well as countries with low real GDP. This list shows exactly that. Now, why might this be important? Simply put, let's remember that this is an index based on perception. Now, let's put that together with foreign direct investment, which is when a foreign company comes to your country and opens up business there. For a corporation, if they view your country as corrupt, if their perception of your country is that of corrupt, then they will not want to open up business there. Theoretically, this is not a correlation, this is causation. The causal mechanism being that companies will have to buy off government officials or even risk their investments being stolen by the government itself. Simply put, it's not good for business. And if you're saying, well, what about corrupt businesses? And you're absolutely right. They do go to these countries. And this index takes that into account. And it lowers the score on the index as well because of it. Now, as far as the index being correlated with low numbers in real GDP, think of it like this. So as just mentioned, few foreign investors will be putting money into these countries' economies. So that's already working against the real GDP. Secondly, if corruption is high in government and the business sector, it means top-level political and economic elites are stealing money and or resources from the country, instead of investing them back into the development of the country. In short, corrupt elites are keeping themselves rich and not focusing on anyone else. So economic development is greatly hindered in these countries. So if you have high levels of corruption, you do end up with low levels of real GDP. And finally, something more specific to our list, rather than just all countries with high levels of corruption. For our 12 countries, the countries with the highest level of perceived corruption on the planet, 7 of the 12, over half of them, are currently suffering civil wars or major civil conflicts. Now, without going into details, because that's a semester-long lecture on civil conflict, but high levels of corruption in countries is one of many contributing factors to why people are displeased with governments and are currently in the middle of armed conflict with them. Again, one of many contributing factors, but it's definitely a factor. But to put everything together, though, to answer the question we always come back to, why does this list even matter? You know what? If you live in a developed country where corruption is low, you have a nice air-conditioned home, 2 cars in the driveway, your idea of foreign policy is what's going on in the city 30 miles away, then frankly, this list may not mean much to you. And that's just fine. Let's be clear about that. Ain't everybody got time for all this? I know it, and you know it, Lo-Fi Nation. And there's nothing wrong with people trying to do right by themselves or for those that are directly around them. To each their own, and good fortune and well-being to all my human beings out there. If you are, however, a person who identifies with your mirror, and understanding that our own reflections stare right back at us from the other side of the planet, that everywhere there are people just like us, struggling, grinding, in pursuit of tomorrow that was way better than today, you might realize that the path forward is together. What affects one of us affects all of us. Corruption is holding developing countries back in a big way. The question to you, Lo-Fi listener, what can you do about it? Or rather, will you do anything about it at all? Write in, and regardless of your response, peace and well-being to all my human beings, wherever you are in the world today. And that's this Tuesday's Top 10. Stay tuned for tomorrow's episode of Lo-Fi Global News. Always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Write in with questions or comments to lofipolisci@planetmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay safe. Wash those hands. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Lofi Poli Sci podcast. Pickering, signing off.